Andy at first. Andy, maybe you can start by telling us a little bit about yourself, who you are, where you come from, how you grew up, and a little bit of how you came to know the Lord.
Right, well, I didn't grow up in a Christian home. I didn't become a Christian until I was about 18. And so basically I just went to weddings, not even funerals, because I was too young, I suppose. And but as a child, I always had a desire to know what the answer to life was, and to know how people could love one another. And I'd made it my life's quest, really, to try and find out. It's a tall order, I know, but I thought at the time, even if it took me 50 years at the time, I remember thinking, then it's worth it. Even if I nearly get the answer, it's worth it. But I was convinced that the answer was partly linked with the supernatural. So I used to be involved in things like the Ouija Board. I used to do a lot of reading about Jungian's dreams. And
what age were you when you were involved in those things?
Well, from a very young age. I would have been at primary school when I became interested in that sort of thing. And because I was interested in the supernatural, and I believed there was something real in that sort of area. I used to watch a lot of films about that. I used to watch horror films, which was probably the only thing I could get hold of at the time. Programs about strange events, and really studying to try and find what it was all about. Because I wanted to make a difference to the world, and I was convinced that the supernatural was the way to look into it.
Right. And so we're talking 10, 11 years of age.
Yeah, from a very young age.
So from that age, you were continually sort of putting yourself into these words. And you talked about the Ouija board. I mean, did it work for you?
Well, my family links had quite a superstitious sort of angle to them. They weren't, as I thought at the time, they weren't heavily involved in the occult. But as we know, just a slight involvement can make a big difference.
Sure.
But there was a lot of superstitious belief in connection there, so I suppose I latched onto that, and my mum used to do the Ouija board on her own, and the glass used to move, and I was convinced there was something real going on there, which even now I'm convinced. I know people can fake it and everything. So from a very young age, I really was convinced that the answer was there, because I was quite disheartened about the behaviour of people and the lack of respect they showed for one another, even at that point in my life. Right. So through my teen years, that continued, and then I started to get involved in other things like TM and yoga and things like that.
Tell us a little bit about this. I mean, did that sort of follow on? Was this the next thing to try and find the answer? You know, you hadn't really been satisfied with what you'd found so far, so you went and looked elsewhere. Was that why you got involved in those things?
I think part of the problem was I was quite an unhappy child. I didn't have the best of upbringings, and I suffered a lot from being down and depressed. So I became interested in the possibility of hypnosis to help me to overcome stress, TM for a similar reason, but also looking for some sort of enlightenment, I think, and to find out more about what's out there. And I began to believe in some sort of force out there in the world that could be manipulated for good or for bad. And I was against institutionalized religion. I thought it was very much man-made. And I thought that there was a general force out there that could be manipulated. It was a lot more deeper than just a belief in a personal God. And so all these experiences that I was grabbing hold of, it was all this search to find out the answer to life.
Right.
And to get more experiences of the supernatural so I could use that and then have a message. Even though I wasn't a Christian, I had no desire to be a Christian. I didn't really know what the message of Christianity was at the time. I wanted to be able to tell groups of people what the answer was and demonstrate supernatural abilities. So from a young age, I was very much thinking along those lines all through my life, really. So I've been aware of this sort of spiritual climate. And when I became a Christian, it obviously all opened up, and it was, in a way, far too simple for my mind. I wanted it to be more complex, but the answer was very simple. Not that being a Christian is simple, but it was an easy answer.
But okay, let's come back a little bit first before we get to that, to TM and yoga. What did they add to your life? What did you feel they added something to your life, or was it something you tried, didn't wasn't happy with and left behind?
I think the fact that I was doing several things. I was seeing a hypnotist for stress, right. Which in a sense is a psychology thing, but there was a spiritual element to that I quite liked, I was interested in. There was a TM, there was yoga, and there were other things that I was dabbling into as well, like tarot reading and so on. But it was all this attempt to find out the answer to life. And I never, even though I was trying TM for stress, as you know, I felt as though there needed to be more love and respect in people's relationships. So the people around me, that didn't bring me satisfaction either.
Right.
So in a way, it wasn't a hopeless quest because I had the right intentions, but I was just looking in the wrong places. And that, it had a knock-on effect. Unfortunately, being involved in those things made me more reliant upon them. And there was a sense of despair because I wasn't finding the answer, but I was determined to find the answer.
Right, yeah.
But it was also clouding me as a person. I remember when I became a Christian, I asked a friend of mine, what am I like now? Am I different? And he said, yeah, you're more aware of things. And I said, what was I like before I was a Christian? What was the general opinion of me? And he said, thick. So So as I was getting into these things, I honestly felt it did have a numbing sensation, a numbing thing upon my life, really, and upon my mental
you
processes.
appeared to be blank, and there appeared to be, the lights were on, but nobody was at home type of thing.
I think
that really, but inside there was the quest, but it wasn't coming outwardly.
That's right, and I think certain meditations can dull your senses. I found that, for me personally, to be the case. And I did meditations connected with yoga, but it's particularly TM that I felt numbed me in a sense, my consciousness. You would have this sense of there being a degree of relaxation, but you were more like a zombie. And the interesting thing was, when I was 17 or 18, but before I became a Christian, some Christians gave to me a leaflet about TM. And even though I'd been doing TM for a couple of years and attending regular sessions with a group, this leaflet made sense because TM claims would constantly be that it enhances your intellect and lots of other incredible claims that they made. And I thought, well, I mustn't be doing it right, which is always the assumption that you're not doing it right. Therefore, you need to do it better and carry on. But in this leaflet, it pointed out that research that Christians had done showed that it had made people's intellect deteriorate. And that was exactly how I felt. It was a numbing sensation. And when I remember some of the trainers who were there and their personalities and the way they came across, it was very much the same as myself. So
in all of this, you see, when you were growing up, you didn't have any Christian background. You went to a couple of weddings, or etc. Can you remember what it was like when you first heard the gospel for the first time of Jesus Christ? And when was that, and how did you begin to respond to that message?
Well, there's a few things. When I was a child at primary school, I remember a teacher who I didn't particularly like. She wasn't very pleasant, but she used to read a passage from the Bible, and we did this project, and it was about Jesus. She drew a picture and a little bit of writing. And I always have fond memories of that for some reason, even though the teacher was awful. And then occasional Christian programs, very old now, things like Moses and things like that. I really enjoyed that, and I had a sort of a stirring towards that, but I had no indication of what a Christian was or any desire to be one. But a significant point was when my stepmother, when I was about 17, invited me to a church, even though she wasn't a believer herself. She was regularly attending a church, and she mentioned this speaking in tongues, speaking in other languages. And because I was interested in the supernatural, I went along. Right. And I remember sitting, so I had an encounter with God here, definitely. I was sitting in the church, and I had a sense that there was a sincerity amongst the people there, and there was a joy that I couldn't explain inside the people. And I'd never come across that before. And it was really